I said, I think the service programming team is probably the funnest team in this church outside of kids. Like, I waffle back and forth between them. If I wasn't pastor, where would I work? Kids ministry, service programming, one of those two things, so they have tons and tons of fun. As we begin this series, or continue this series today, kind of part two, I'm really, really excited to share this message with you. But before we do, we have been finishing up. In fact, today was the last day of a 21-day devotional that a lot of us committed to 21 days ago called Time Well Spent. And so that finished up this morning, and some of you are like, oh man, this was really awesome. I've been so impressed. There was over 100 people a day that were doing this. At least that's how many people logged in. You know, maybe you logged in and didn't read it and just pretended to make me feel better. I don't know. But about 100 people a day logged in and did this. So we sat down, and Skyla, who did the announcements this morning, and myself have written and put together a devotional for Lent. And if you don't know what Lent is, it's the 40-some days that lead up to Easter. And it's usually a time in church tradition when the church kind of explores the gospel and prepares ourselves for the Easter story. So we put together a devotional, a daily devotional, starting tomorrow called So You May Believe. And you can find it on our website at tcat.church/JohnDevo. Okay, so you know, we got really creative with the URL there. But it starts tomorrow morning. It'll pop up just like the last one, and you don't have to sign up or anything. It's just there, tcat.church/JohnDevo. So You May Believe, just so you know where that title comes from, was what John said the point of him writing his gospel was in the first place. In fact, in like the 20th chapter of John, he actually says, I told all these stories and I wrote all these things together so you may believe that Jesus is who he says he is. And I think there's no better exploration for some of us to maybe commit the next 40 days to go through that. So John Devo, tcat.church/JohnDevo. All right, so this is Walk This Way. We're in part two today. If you missed last week, or if you're like, you know, this puts you to sleep and you want to have to watch it again so you fall asleep again, go to tcat.church/walkthisway. You can catch up on last week's message. I put some discussion questions up there, and by 1 o'clock today, today's message along with some discussion questions will be up there. If you want to go through this with your small group, you want to go through this with your significant other, you want to wrestle with this with a friend, we would love for you to not just listen to my voice, but to kind of think about this stuff. Think about what we're talking about, put it into practice, wrestle with it, and maybe decide what you believe. Because we're talking about this whole idea that Jesus has called us to this amazing invitation, right? We've been given this amazing invitation to walk this way, to follow him. What on earth does that mean, right? Well, last week we got a couple of really kind of startling revelations. So one of the things we discovered last week was that being a sinner does not disqualify you from following Jesus. In fact, I said it was a prerequisite, right? That being a sinner does not disqualify you from following Jesus. Everyone who Jesus invited to follow him was already a sinner. They were someone who was already broken and they had a mess. In fact, the only people who said they didn't want to follow Jesus were the ones who thought they were already perfect, right? Every single person that Jesus called to follow him was a sinner. Number two, and this one's even kind of hard to say, but being an unbeliever does not disqualify you from following Jesus. There was not a single one of his early followers who looked at Jesus when they met him and said, you're obviously the Son of God. That was not their first reaction. They said, you're a cool teacher, or you're a cool guy. There's something about you maybe, but none of them believed. In fact, it took all the way to seeing him in the resurrection to go, oh my gosh, he really is the Son of God. And they had different revelations along the way, but none of them believed fully that Jesus was the Son of God until after the resurrection. And so, again, being an unbeliever does not disqualify you from the invitation to follow Jesus. He's asked you. Now, the thing is, religion has said it otherwise for a long time, okay? And if you grew up in the church or ever got kicked out of a church or you felt like, I wasn't comfortable in a church, you know what I'm about to say to be true. You see, religion then and religion now often says, hey, change and you can join us, right? If you'll just change, you can join us. If you'll get your life together, if you'll kind of like do a step program and get all your stuff in order, and as soon as you do that, we'll give you a test. And if you pass the test, then you can join us. And this is what the Pharisees said in the time. This is why they didn't like Jesus so much, right? Because Jesus came in and he flipped the whole thing on his head and said, no, join us and you will change. It's in following me. It's in walking this way. It's in moving in the same direction as me that your life will change. And he says, look, I'm not asking you to change right now, right? He looked at Matthew last week and said, you're still a tax collector. You still got a mess in your life, but hey, follow me. But be careful, because as you follow me, I just want to warn you, full disclaimer, as you follow me, your life will change. That's the beautiful invitation. Right? That's the beautiful invitation that Jesus has issued to everyone. Rich people, poor people, broken people, right? People from every different kind of walk of life, every different walk of faith, whether they had big faith or no faith or something in between. Jesus said, hey, come on, follow me, walk this way. And so we said this question we're going to wrestle with for 8 weeks is, am I following? right? This is the question that in some shape or form, every Jesus follower should wake up every morning and ask themselves this question. I have to ask myself this question all the time. Am I following? Not like, do I think I behave the right way? Do I think I believe the right way? But do I behave the right way and believe the right way because I am following Jesus? Is my life changing because I am following Jesus? Or am I changing my life in hopes that Jesus might invite me? Right? That's the question. Am I following? So we started wrestling with this. And so today, I want to tell you another story. And this is a story that's really special to me because it's a story that if you grew up in church long enough, you've probably heard before. And we're lucky enough that we have multiple accounts of it. Here's what's spectacular about the life of Jesus. If you've not thought about this, just kind of let this sink into your brains for a minute. We have 4 different accounts of the life of Jesus, right? 4 different accounts. No, there's no other historical figure by which we have this much material to talk about who they were as a historical character. 4 different accounts, right? So there's Matthew, who was an eyewitness, right? And he wrote about things that he saw. Then there's Mark, who hung out with Peter, and he told Peter's side of the story. So Mark's gospel is really what Peter observed. And then you've got Luke, who says at the beginning of his gospel, look, I investigated all this, and I met with all the eyewitnesses, and I hung out with Paul and all the things. And so he was like an investigative reporter, and he wrote down everything. And then you've got John, who was an eyewitness of this whole thing. So 4 different accounts. And what you may not have been taught as a kid, and then I know I wasn't taught as a kid, was that all 4 of those people were telling the same story. They were just telling it from different perspectives. And that's huge. Because, you might read a story like today. I'm going to tell you a story from the Gospel of Matthew. We're just going to read through it really fast. And then I want to read you the version from Luke that's the same story. And I'll tell you why in a second. But sometimes we read through these stories and we go, I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense. Well, each of the writers were writing for different reasons, telling the same story. So, for example, in this story that I'm going to read you today, I'm going to read you Matthew's account of the calling of the first disciples. And then I'm going to read you Luke's. And I'm going to kind of breeze through Matthew, and then I'm going to take some time to really dig into Luke. And here's why. See, Matthew was writing to a Jewish audience. And when Matthew wrote his gospel, he was writing to people who already had big faith. And so if you were like me as a kid and you knew this story that I'm about to read before you even popped up on the screen, you get to the end of this and you think you're left with a really unrealistic picture of following Jesus. Because it sounds really hard. It sounds really, really, really tough. So let me just read this to you, and then we'll talk about Luke in just a minute. So here's how it starts. This is what Matthew says about Jesus calling his first disciples. So it says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter, that's really important, remember that, and his brother Andrew, who I think I'm named after, but ask my mama later, okay? They were casting their net into the lake, for they were fishermen, okay? So there's some detail. Now it says, come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once, they left their nets and followed him. You're like, what? At once? What? It gets worse. Listen to this. Going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John. And they were in a boat with their father Zebedee preparing their nets. Jesus called to them, and immediately they left the boat, and listen to this, and their father, and followed him. I mean, can you imagine this scene for a minute? Like, you listen to this and you're like, hey, Dad, see the guy with the sandals? I'm going with him. Like, tell Mom bye. Here I go, right? Have fun with the family business. Have fun storming the castle. I just totally went Princess Bride there for a minute. But you get the picture, right? It just seems super, like, this doesn't seem spiritual. This seems irresponsible. Like, you just left the family business. You left your dad in the boat, and you followed this guy you just met on the side of the beach. And if you were like me growing up, like I heard sermon after sermon after sermon on this particular text. And when I got to the end of it, I'm like, I don't know. That seems really tough. Like, this is really difficult. Like, if God calls right now, you got to go right now. And it's like, if you don't have faith a little bit, you don't have faith at all, and all this stuff. And I meant, like, do I get to finish high school first? Do I? Am I supposed to literally walk away from my job? Like, how does this actually work? And I remember growing up as a kid going, I don't know that I believe like that. And hear my heart, look, I was at church every time the doors were open, right? I was in every Sunday, like my Sunday school teachers knew my name. I wreaked havoc. They didn't like it when I showed up, okay? I fell out of it, off of every pew and knocked over every bell you can imagine. And every church I ever went to, it was tough, right? They didn't like it when I showed up, but I was there. Like screaming and all the things. I was always there. So, I'm not saying that I didn't hear this over and over again. And it wasn't like, that I didn't believe it. I just found it really tough. And maybe, just maybe, you were growing up as a kid or even sitting here right now and you read this and you go, man, that's really tough. And the thing is, here's what's beautiful about this. I want to tell you Luke's story because this is what happened But this isn't actually all that happened, because Matthew was writing to a group of people. The Jews had already had big faith. Right? He's writing to a huge group of people who already had big faith. But Luke comes along and he tells the story to people like you and people like me, Gentiles, who didn't know anything about anything. And so what Matthew wrote is what happened, but it's actually not all that happened. And so I want to share with you what happened in Luke's gospel. Maybe we can pick this apart. Before I do, I want to give you some context, okay? So look at this map. It looks like something right out of Zelda. I wish I could make a better map than this, but this is what I got for now, okay? But Jesus' entire ministry, here's the Sea of Galilee where this story takes place. Jesus' entire ministry took place really between Jerusalem and the Sea of Galilee, this little stretch of nothingness. And here's why that's so amazing. Because stories that happen in the middle of nowhere right here have shaped history more than any other stories. I mean, think about that. Jesus' ministry took place in the middle of nowhere over there, and we all know something about it. Isn't it incredible, right? And it takes place in the Sea of Galilee. Check out this picture. This is just a straight-up stock picture. I didn't take that. I've been there, and I've been on one of those boats, but I didn't take this picture. I just wanted to show you this. It's not like Lake Tuscaloosa, okay? I don't want you to imagine the Sea of Galilee like that. It's like a sea. See these mountains way off in the distance? It's a deep sea. In fact, you're looking across the most narrow portion of the Sea of Galilee. It's a massive, massive sea. And that's where the story takes place. So I want you to see what Luke says happened when Jesus called his first disciples. And again, it's the same story that Matthew told. He just includes some things that Matthew did not. So here we go. Here's how Luke begins the story in chapter 5. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and this is Sea of Galilee, same thing, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. So here's the picture. Like Luke tells us, Jesus is preaching. And this is the part, like, whenever Jesus spoke, crowds just followed him everywhere he went. So Jesus is like, he's preaching, and they're crowding and crowding and crowding, and they've pushed him all the way up to the edge of the lake, right? And you can imagine Jesus kind of standing there with water on his feet, because there's no stages or anything. Like, he's literally standing, and the waves are hitting him in the back of the ankles, and this crowd is just pressing and pressing and pressing and pressing in on him. So he's teaching, and I don't want you to miss this. This is really, really important. This word listening is huge. It's huge because faith begins with information. It always begins with information. Faith begins with Jesus saying something. This wasn't like a cold call that Jesus made to his disciples. He was there preaching and teaching. There was this entire crowd of people who were listening to him, right? And they're listening, and they're observing, and they're listening, and they're standing there as he's preaching the word. So it says, the story continues, he saw on the water's edge 2 boats left there by fishermen who were washing their nets. So here's how this worked, okay? Fishermen would fish, and we're going to figure this out in a minute. They would fish at night, and when they were done, they had to clean their nets because the nets were their livelihood. And it wasn't like they had like fishing line where they could just go buy it. It was really expensive and really rare, and they had to take care of them. So they dragged their boats up on the shore, and then they'd take their nets and they'd string them between these 2 poles, and then they would fish the junk and the garbage out of it, right? Like just kind of clean it up and dry them. And this process took a while. So they fish all night, and then they take a couple hours to clean all of their nets. So as Jesus is sitting here talking, the crowd is pressing in on him. These fishermen's boats are kind of sitting over here, and the fishermen are just off to the side cleaning their nets, which means that Simon and Andrew and James and John were standing there listening as they're cleaning their nets, and Jesus is talking. They're listening to what Jesus is saying, but they're cleaning their nets, okay? They're not super involved. They're just, they're there. This was a place where there were rabbis all the time, so it wouldn't have been surprising to them for this event to be occurring. So Jesus, it says, got into one of the boats. Jesus, got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon Peter. And he asked him to put out a little bit from the shore, right? So he's standing there, and he sees one of the boats, and they've pressed him enough to he's like, you know what, let me just step into one of the boats. Can you just bring this away from the shore a little bit? There's no crowd control. I don't have any bouncers. I can't keep the people away. Can we just back up just a little bit, and then I'll talk to the people from the boat, right? Can you inconvenience yourself just a little bit, and let me use your boat? And so we don't know whether Peter put it on a rope and let it out, or whether Peter got on the boat with Jesus and let it out from the shore a little bit. We don't know. The story doesn't say. But what it does say is that after he did this and put away from the shore, he sat down and taught. He sat down and taught. He taught the people from the boat. And this is absolutely huge. I don't want you to miss this, okay? You see, Jesus began this whole process with his disciples, who he was getting ready to call and they didn't know it, and with the crowd of people that were around him by talking to them, by having a conversation with them, by sharing information with them. And so many times as a kid, I got this idea that Jesus just literally walked down the street. And I think he's winsome enough to do this. Don't get me wrong, that's not what I mean. But that the disciples had such great faith that they just immediately left, and they'd never heard him say anything, and they didn't know who he was, and he was just some guy. He wasn't just some guy. They'd been listening to him. And so they're sitting here listening to Jesus talk about the way God says things really are. Now, it says when he'd finished speaking, he said to Simon, and what do you think that he said, right? So, Peter's there, he's been working on the nets, and he's been listening, and he's been working, and he lets this boat out a little bit, right? He loans Jesus the boat. But what do you think he says to Simon, right? Hey, how'd you like that sermon? How was that message? Was that good? Yeah, it was good, right? Good, leave your whole family and follow me, right? I mean, maybe because he had a little bit of context, right? But that's actually not what happened. If you know the story, it goes like this. He says, hey, put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch. This is huge, okay? This is massive. I don't want you to miss this. If you've been tuned out for like 30 seconds, come back to me, okay? Jesus says to Peter, I want you to do something you've done 100 times, but I want you to do it a little bit differently because I asked you to do it. I want you to do something that you've done over and over and over again and you know how to do, but I want you to do it a little bit differently, right? And this is massive for where Jesus is about to go with his disciples. I want to take something that you've done over and over again, and I would like you to try it just a little bit differently just because I asked you to do it. Would you do that, right? Would you take me fishing? Can we go out and go fishing, Peter? Now, this is a problem for two reasons, and you already know one of them, right? Peter and James and John and Andrew just got done doing what? They just got done fishing all night. Like, dude, you're obviously a carpenter, okay? We fished all night, right? We just finished finishing what we finish when we get finished fishing, right? We've already cleaned the nets, and this is a long process. And look, you don't fish during the day, Jesus. You fish at night because the lake is, the fish would come up into the cooler water, and during the day when the water's hot, the fish drop back down. And if you're fishing with nets like we're fishing, this isn't the way to do it. In fact, Jesus, I've already finished doing it the way you're supposed to do it, and I've caught nothing. Nothing. So all of this stuff is kind of spinning in Peter's head. So he responds to Jesus. And I want you to notice how Peter responds, because it's not like unkind. And it's not like, there's a little bit of respect in it. But, just look at what he says. He says, Master. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night, and we haven't caught anything, right? Same thing. I just did it the way I'm supposed to, and I came up short. And I love this. He's like, Master, this is like sir, okay? This is like, Jedi master. Like, it's not right respect. It's not like, Lord or Savior or anything else. It's just like a kind way to say, look, sir, I already did it the way I'm supposed to do it, and there's this whole crowd of people out here, and fishing is my livelihood. So if they see me go out there in this boat, like, my reputation is at stake in the midst of this. And that's what he's thinking, right? But what's really at stake, hold on, back up. That's all right. It's too late now. What's really at stake in the middle of this is whether or not Peter thought he could trust Jesus. Do you see that? Like, what's really in the stake in the midst of this moment is, okay, nothing in this makes sense. None of this makes sense whatsoever. This is not how you fish. I'm already exhausted. I've already cleaned my nets. But what was really at stake in the crux of this moment is whether Peter thought that he could trust Jesus. That's what makes his response so beautiful, because he says, listen, because you say so, not because I think it's going to work, not because I think this is the way you're supposed to do it, not because I think it's going to protect my reputation, but because I've listened to you a little bit, and because you are who you are, not because of anybody, like if anybody else asked me to do this, I wouldn't, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. And the amazing thing is, Peter had no idea what hung in the balance of this moment. And you can't miss that. Like, Peter didn't know what was happening in this moment. When he was choosing whether or not to trust Jesus, he had no idea what hung in the balance of his future. He had no idea what the plan was. He had no idea what the call was going to be. He had no idea what his life was going to look like. And this is one of those moments. This is one of those moments where he makes a decision that will affect the rest of his life, and he didn't even know. Jesus is like, hey, take me fishing, right? Will you just take me fishing? I know you fish a lot. I know you fished last night, but hey, will you take me fishing? Will you do something you've done thousands of times, but do it just a little bit different way than you've ever done it before, just because I asked? And like, if Jesus was a teaching pastor, right, this would have been the moment where he wheeled out the screen and put it next to him and goes, hey, Peter, look at this picture. Look at this. Look at that. Isn't it awesome? And Peter goes, what is that? Well, this is your tomb. Look at this monstrosity of a building. This is going to be called St. Peter's Basilica. And get this, they're going to take 118 years to build this. Look at the inside of this, Peter. Have you ever seen this? Look, can you get the scale of this? Look at all these people dressed really goofy in fanny packs. They're going to come to see your grave, right? Peter, they're going to come and see your grave. The people are going to go all over the world. It's going to be the jewel of the Renaissance, Peter. They're going to name it after you. Guess what? You're St. Peter. Will you take me fishing? Yeah, I mean, like, I'm going to take the whole boat, right? This is wow, I'm going to get this. You can have the whole business, sure, right? But Jesus couldn't tell him that, right? And this is what's amazing about this. And I don't want to like imply, and I'm veering off a little bit, but some of you are in this very moment because Jesus is asking you to do something. Maybe it's something you've done thousands and thousands of times. He's asking you to do it just a little bit different way. And you have no idea. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of your decision to trust Jesus or not. Now, the story continues, right? Because it's not done. So he goes, when they're done, not when they believed so, not when they had thought so, when they had done so. And the doing is really important in this, okay? This isn't about salvation. This is about faith in action in this moment. When they had done something, when they'd taken the step, when Jesus had asked them to do something and they decided to go fishing even though it made no sense, when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. Remember, I read this story to you guys a couple weeks ago. So they signaled their partners, right? Andrew, James, John, all you guys, sons of Zebedee, come on, help us. They signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. Such a huge, large, massive catch of fish. And it didn't make any sense. So when Simon Peter saw this, what do you think he said? Dad, go get the refrigeration truck. We don't have to work for 2 weeks. There weren't any refrigeration trucks. It looks like Jesus didn't have a teaching screen. I don't know how that went, okay? But it's amazing to me that our reaction would be like, look at all the fish. This is amazing. And you know, we would think it would say something like, Peter looked and he was like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to fish for a long time. Or thank goodness I'm going to make extra money to send my kids to college or whatever else, right? But suddenly, it wasn't about the fish anymore. It wasn't about the fish. It wasn't about what had just happened. Well, it was about what just happened, but it wasn't about the physical thing that just happened. And some of y'all know this story. Here's how it goes. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. And again, if you've not been paying attention to this, like don't miss this, okay? This is huge. In this moment, Peter realized who Jesus really was. And in this moment, Peter realized who he really was. And Peter had been face to face with the Savior of the world for like 3 or 4 hours, like listening to him teach and in the boat. And, you know, Jesus he could preach a lot longer than me and get away with it. Okay, he was Jesus. But like they've been together a while. But it wasn't until this moment when he did something that he'd done 1,000 times, but did it a little bit different way because Jesus asked him to. And in trusting Jesus in that moment and doing something differently, he came to realize who Jesus was. And see, Peter's little itty bitty faith intersected with Jesus' massive faithfulness. And in this moment, Peter's relationship with Jesus began. Just because Jesus said, Peter, will you take me fishing? It's huge. This is it. This is massive. And we think about what looks like WalK this way. Because Peter didn't know Jesus was divine yet, and he didn't know anything about the Trinity, he didn't know about the cross, and but he trusted Jesus enough at that moment. Jesus took a little itty-bitty act of faith, a simple, silly thing, to go fishing. And he combined it with his own faithfulness. And in that moment, Peter goes, oh my gosh, Lord, you knew me, and you know who I am, and I know who I am. And his relationship with Jesus began. Now, it's not done, right? So, for he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so were James and John, right? The sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. And so they're just like overwhelmed and completely like unbelievably amazed. And so then it says, Jesus said to Simon and everybody else, listen, don't be afraid, right? Because why wouldn't you be? This is a pretty crazy moment. He says, from now on, which basically says, I have a future for you. I have a plan for you. I have a plan for you, and I couldn't tell you what it was until you made a step to do something you've done lots and lots of times before, but to do it differently because I asked you to do it. I couldn't tell you what the plan was then, but I can tell you what the plan is now. He says, you will fish for people. And I'm sure Peter and James and Andrew and John, they're like, what did he say? Whatever, yes, we're in. We are in. And it says they pulled their boats up on the shore, right? They just yanked them up on the shore. They left everything and followed him. And you would have too. And I would have too. Because in this moment, they actually realized, after listening to Jesus and then inconveniencing themselves a little bit to loaning the boat, and then again, making this decision to go fishing with Jesus, and then finally, after all of that, they were ready to leave their nets and follow Jesus. To which we say, Matthew, it would have been really great for you to include some of these details, right? Matthew, if you'd have said it that way, it's completely different. But that's what's beautiful about having all these different perspectives and all these different texts that tell the same story of Jesus. In the middle of this is a simple story of Jesus showing us what it looks like to follow him. Now, in this story, I want to break this down, and this is kind of the last thing I'm going to do. In this story, I think it reveals to us really a step, really 4 steps. And I think that all of us can find ourselves in one of 4 of these steps. I think that what Jesus is outlining is what it really looks like to walk this way. This whole pattern that he led his early disciples through is a pattern for all of us to go, okay, if I want to follow Jesus, if I really want to know what this is all about, if I really want to take a step, then I think it looks like this. And this is what Jesus says. In fact, I think this is what the 4 stages look like, and you're probably in one. Your stage, you could be in the sit and listen stage, right? You could just be in the stage where you just need to keep sitting and listening. You need to gather in all this information. You need to listen to what's talking about Jesus. Maybe your next step is simply to just come back next Sunday and to listen again. Right? Some of us think we got to jump the gun and go straight to going all in, when really we're in the stage where we need to sit and listen. We need to sit and listen to what Jesus has to say. Just gather in the information and take some time to listen. And maybe that's where you find yourself. The second step is the loaning the boat step, right? This is where Peter said, okay, you can stand in my boat and I'll let it go out of the shore a little bit. And whether Peter tethered it out or whether he got in the boat with Jesus, we don't know, but he let Jesus teach from his boat. So maybe you're in the loaning the boat stage. You need to inconvenience yourself just a little bit, all right? Inconvenience yourself just a little bit to allow Jesus to begin to do something in you. Here's what this could look like. You remember that starting point thing we keep talking about over and over again? And in the back of your mind saying, I can't do that. That's such an inconvenience. Maybe that's it, all right? Maybe you need to download the YouVersion Bible app, or you need to go get a Bible. We'll give you one, right? And you need to commit to read the New Testament. Maybe that's your next step. Like, you need to inconvenience yourself just a little bit, to give of yourself in a way that you can start to get your questions answered. Because what was happening in this moment was Peter and the rest of the disciples, they're moving from the stage that Jesus is just a teacher to something else is going on, and they're willing to loan in the boat. They're willing to inconvenience themselves just a little bit to start getting their questions answered. So maybe your next step is starting point. You need to go, you need to get in a circle and say, look, don't ask me any questions. I have the questions, and you bring your list with you, okay? Maybe you need to read the New Testament. You need to sit down and commit to it. I'm not sure. But maybe you find yourself in the loan the boat stage. Step number 3 is take him fishing. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because this stage is really where Jesus wants to take something you've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times and have you do it differently than you've done it before, because he asked you to. And I can tell you from experience that it's going to be probably in one of 3 categories. It's going to come in your relationships, the way that you do business or work, or your finances. Relationships, career, or finances. And here's what's beautiful about this. You already know what that is, because you've been sitting and listening for a while. And you got some of your questions answered, and you've been sitting in a circle for a while. And every once in a while, like every time you kind of bow your head and you begin to pray, this thing stirs inside you. And there's this voice. You're not really sure if it's God. You're not really sure if it's your conscience. You don't know yet, but this voice is stirring in you. Every time in your quiet time, it goes, I really should start I really should stop. And every time you sit down to pray or it's quiet or you find yourself listening to a worship song or something, you hear that over and over again. And it seems so silly. It seems like such a trivial thing. It's something to do with your finances. It's something to do with your relationships. It's something to do with the way you do business. I'm not sure. But it's more than likely in one of those three categories. And every time you sit down, you just keep hearing this voice. And I really oughta. That is more than likely God leaning in and going, will you try something you've done 100 times my way? Because here's what happens. See, the same thing that happened to Peter is what's going to happen to you, because it's happened to a lot of us in this room, is that you're going to do that. You're going to choose to end that relationship that's been hard on you, or you're going to choose to date in a different way. You're going to choose to treat your spouse in a different way. You're going to choose to give money that doesn't make any sense, or you're going to choose to do business in a different way, in a more honest and in a way of integrity that maybe is going to cost you, is going to make things difficult, is going to look different than a lot of other people are doing, and you're going to do one of those three things. And you get done, and you're going to go home, you're going to drive back, and you go, oh, my Lord, you knew my name. You knew my name. You know my name. And when you do that, and you experience that, you're in that take him fishing stage. And when you do that, and you begin to intersect your little bitty faith with God's faithfulness, stuff starts happening in your life that will lead you to the fourth one, which is to leave your nets. Right? It will lead you to the fourth step, which is just, it's time to leave your nets. And some of us have been doing the take him fishing thing for a long time, but we've been playing the shell game with our life with God, and it's time to stop playing games and just go, okay, take it all. I'm in, right? I'm in. I've listened. I've loaned you the boat. I've given you, I've made decisions to move in a different direction than I normally have, and I'm ready. I'm ready. Just take my life. I've been playing games long enough. It's no more shell game, no more shifting things around. Like, I'm in. And I don't know what stage that you're in, but I don't have to, because you already do. You already know. Maybe you're in the sit and listen phase. Maybe you're in the loan in the boat phase. Maybe you're in the take him fishing and you need to make a decision to do something a little bit different. Or maybe it's time for you to leave your nets and say, all right, Lord, I'm in. But the point is not to measure yourself. It's not to go, oh, look how me, I'm at step 3 and you're only at step 2. That's not, don't do that, okay? That's not, I always am hesitant to put steps and stages in because we start getting holier than now all of a sudden. Don't do that, all right? It's not what I'm saying. The point is, whatever your next step is, take it. Whatever your next step is, take it. You don't need my permission. You know, God's been speaking to you for a while. Maybe it's just come back next Sunday. Maybe it's go to starting point. Maybe it's read your New Testament. Maybe it's change the way you do business or change a relationship. Or maybe it's go, God, I'm here and I'm in. Whatever your next step is, take it. Because I can say as one, and this is it. This is my last thing. As someone who's lived my life like this now for a long time, you will not regret your relationship with Jesus. You will not. You will not regret. And when you allow those things in your life to intersect, when you allow your little faithfulness to intersect with his massive faithfulness, your life will change. And you will not regret it. Let me pray for you. Father God, I just want to thank you so much for this invitation that you've given us in Jesus. You've given this massive, amazing invitation. You've laid this life out in front of us, and some of us are wrestling with whether to say yes to you. We don't know what hangs in the balance, God. You know, we're scared to death, and we don't know what hangs in the balance, but we are at that moment where you are calling us to take a step, and we have no idea the future you have planned for us if we're willing to just trust you in that moment. So I pray for boldness and courage for my friends here in this room, that you would just help them to trust you, because you are trustworthy. It's not you that is the problem, it's us. So in our midst of unbelief and our itty-bitty faithfulness, God, help us to trust you with one step, whatever that step might be. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Thank you all so much for coming to TCAT this weekend. God bless you.